Hi, welcome to Integrative Lawyers of the World. I'm your host, Carrie Raleigh, and our guest this episode is Neetu Chetty from sunny Durban, South Africa. Neetu is committed to social justice. She is an edupreneur, and she designed a course for integrative law. I am so glad you're here joining us today and that we can share Neetu's legal journey, work, and her experience with you. If you'd like to learn about what other integrative lawyers are doing around the world, or if you would like to support the Integrative Law Movement, please go to our website at www.integrativelaw.com. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Neetu. Thank you so much for joining us from sunny Durban, South Africa. Is it sunny there by you today?
It actually is quite sunny. By the way, hi, Carrie. Thanks for having me. It's fabulous in Durban. It's sunny, it's warm. As you can see, I've got no jacket on. So
Oh, it is nice.
it's wonderful.
We're just so excited to have you be part of our Integrative Lawyers of the World episode. You really are a leader in the integrative law movement, and I don't even know where to start. Your commitment to social, and I think they're probably interwoven together, your commitment to social justice, and as part of being an edupreneur, designing the integrative law course. So where should we start? Why don't we start with your commitment to social justice? Why don't you tell us, like, what does social justice look like to you? How do we get it? And sometimes in the world, it looks like we're far from it. So how do we work towards social justice?
I think that's an amazing question, especially in the times that we're living in right now. So, the question is, what is social justice to me? Um, I think that's a question that requires us each to introspect for ourselves what it means for each of us, because it could mean something different to as individuals. For me, it's about looking at our community, looking at our society, looking at the tools that we have through, for example, the law, which I think is an absolutely powerful tool, and using it to change people's lives. It's not something that requires you to make a big grand gesture. It starts with a simple step, a small step in the right direction. With me, it started with looking at women and the place of women in society, how women are perceived in society, how women respond to each other in society, women as particularly a vulnerable group, even though we may not like to admit it, um, in society in which we are living in. Because in as much as we have equal rights, how equal um, are those rights really? I mean, think about it. So for me, right now, I work a lot in anti-human trafficking and anti-gender-based violence, which I think is very important. What led me in that direction was the high statistics in South Africa and the world over when it came to sexual offences against women, gender-based violence against women. I remember attending a conference once, and there was a director of one of the biggest law firms on stage. And she ended up sharing about how she was a victim of domestic violence and nobody would have ever known. Nobody would have ever known any better. Nobody would have known any better. And so I think it was a burning desire that was in me from a very young age. And, over the past, giving my age away here, I would say 15 years, about 15 years ago, I really threw my hat in the ring and I became an activist. And being a woman in an unequal world where they say we have equality as women, it wasn't easy.
In the developed world, there is this, I think, idea that because the laws exist to give equality to women, that there is no, not that there is no gender inequality to women, but that it's not as bad as it was, or in some places women have, their rights are, equal. It's not something that we have to fight for anymore because of the progress that's already been made.
Look, stating that we as women have the right to equality on paper, it's a wonderful gesture. It's a step in the right direction. But looking at it on paper and looking at it in application are two different things. I mean, you and I both know, as I'm sure many women who may be listening to the podcast, you have to work that much harder to get a seat at the table as a partner in the law firm. And if you are given that seat at the table as a partner in the law firm, it's more to meet a quota. And then you're left asking yourself the question, did I get this position because I deserve it? Knowing that I've worked that much harder to get it? Or did I get it because they need to fill a quota in terms of gender equality? So it doesn't matter. When I think about it, in as much as we may have constitutions and statutes and legislations in different countries that says that women have the right to equality and the right to choice as to their body, etc., and their dignity, etc., it comes down to how it's being applied. If you look at the world over, who are the people who are holding the most senior positions, even in government throughout the world? It's men. It's men. I can count on one hand the number of female prime ministers and presidents we've had around the world. And even with them having been in those positions, these women came up against much scrutiny. There's always much scrutiny against women when they are in positions of power. And that is why I say it looks good on paper, but in application, there are huge gaps, there are huge loopholes, and that is why there needs to be an inherent internal conscious mental shift towards how we approach women in the workplace, women in law, women in places of power.
How to combat that? Because you said, like, with I guess it's changing people's hearts and minds. Until that happens, you have the quotas and what we have in the US, affirmative action in different areas. But like you said, there are a lot of critiques to those proposals or those programs of affirmative action and quotas, because some people say, well, you're giving people an unfair advantage, and other people who benefit from those programs saying, well, did I get here because I earned it, or did I get here because you filled a quota? Is there any other scenario or options for us to work toward equality, whether it's gender-based equality, racial-based equality, religious-based equality, equality along any lines? Is there what other paths do we have to work toward it, or to get it, to live it, not even to work toward it, to live it?
It's so interesting that you asked me that question, because I would say in the last year, I've been dealing a lot with transformation and creating a mind shift in people on the race front, though. I wouldn't state in which part of the country it is, but the lessons that you learn there can be applied across the board to gender, to people with disabilities, anyone who was a marginalized group in the past and who still continue to be a marginalized group. And the reason why I say women are a marginalized group is because we continue to be treated unequally, regardless of what they say on paper. So for me, it starts with education, right? It starts with education in creating a mind shift, podcasts like this, conversations like this. It starts with going into the corporate space and allowing reflective programs and training to be rolled out, where you get men, get the opposite sex, get men or the opposite race or whatever it is, to take a step back and engage in activities where they place themselves in the shoes of the other person. And they have a lived experience through the eyes of the other person. Now, what I've generally noticed is people are very apprehensive to have this conversation in the professional space because they make it uncomfortable. It starts with one person speaking out. One person speaking out, hey, let's chat about transformation. Do we know what diversity really is? Is there a difference between diversity and inclusion? Heck yes. Diversity could mean I'm placing a woman in this position. Inclusion is, am I making her feel like she belongs? Am I giving her the opportunity to pursue further development in the space as I would my male colleagues? So, we speak about a maze and different streams coming together to a river. I believe Kim chats about this in a book, Lawyers of Peacemakers, where she alludes to it when she talks about what the elephant is all about, which is her mascot, her symbol for integrated law. So it's about tapping into these different streams and everything that in the integrative law movement has to do with collaborating with different streams, HR, the psychology department, different departments, management, and bringing them together to roll out training programs to have this conversation. So most recently, I did it on purpose. I did a course on instructional design through a university in South Africa, the University of Cape Town. And it's something that I've always done. Right, so instructional design, or rather, let me phrase it like this. Instructional designers are agents of change. So what instructional designers do is that they come into organizations, not necessarily higher education, it's the corporate space as well. And they work with the organization to identify what are your learning knots. So when we're talking about learning knots, we're basically asking the question, what are the problems in your organization? And how are you struggling to unravel it? And what is it that I can do to come in to help you unravel that knot through designing training that creates reflection and introspection to achieve the goals that you're wanting to achieve in the organization. So if an organization wants transformation, for example, you would design these activities. You may design a training program, you may design a workshop, you may leverage a learning management system, whatever it is that works for the organization, to place employees on a program, a short-term program that could form a part of their ongoing development, where they are placed in a position to reflect upon their conduct and grow through introspective activities and through evaluation. So it's quite an impactful, mandate to have, or a portfolio to have. And I thought it would be very interesting for me to do this because I could take it and I could apply it in law. I could apply it in the legal field. So where training is needed in the legal field, you design for the legal field, you roll out, you empower, you open up doors.
So how did you go from being a lawyer, having your law degree, to doing this instructional design? Because that almost seems more like psychology, or you know what I mean? Or I don't know, what is it, like life coach, psychology, personal development? How did those two intersect?
I get that question a lot. So I'm very passionate about the law because I believe that law is power in our hands. And lawyers themselves are agents of change if they know how to use the law to create change. And that has been my ongoing theme since I was a student, be an agent of change. So I went into practice, and whilst I was in practice, I realized that I was extremely disappointed with the legal profession back then, that something was missing. There was no sense of empathy. In fact, I was in something that in South Africa we call articles. So after you study your law degree, you go into articles for your practical training. And I was in a law firm where it was dealing with predominantly criminal law cases. And my principal, which was my senior attorney, came to me and told me, Neetu, you're going to get in your car and you're going to take a drive with me. And we're going to the courthouse because there's a client whose bail hearing is coming up. And it was the first time that I met this individual, and he had been charged with rape. And so there was a very interesting observation because I sat there and I listened to my principal. It's part of my training now, engage with this accused person. And the conversation was around what the defense was going to be, regardless of what the facts were. Now, obviously, you have to defend your client. It's very, very important. But sitting there, having had a 6-month-old daughter at home at that time, I felt such a conflict within myself. Do I want to be here? Is this what the legal profession is all about? What about empathy for the victim? What about rehabilitation for this gentleman that's sitting in front of me? Do I want to be in this profession? So it was a real life shock for me. And when I stepped away, I remember going home and saying to my husband, I don't want to do this. If this is what the law is, I don't want to be in it. And if I choose to remain in it, I have to be impactful in what I do. I have to change the next generation of law students. And can you imagine being a young mom and you're sitting there and it's like, how do I go about doing this? So as life would have it, I was contacted 2 weeks later by the head of the School of Law at one of the established institutions in South Africa, and they offered me a lecturing position. It's almost as if everything fell in line. I didn't even apply for it. And that is why I said it seems like all the stars lined up.
Yeah.
So I was ex-alumni. I had done my master's. I had a scholarship to do my master's in childcare and protection and sexual offences with them. And at that time, when I did my master's, I was a graduate assistant in the Faculty of Law. So once you leave, you know, your lecturers are still people that you love. But when the director of the school called me and said, Neetu, we'd love this. And I'm like, yes, I have an opportunity to mold minds now. And it was the best pathway I've ever taken, because it allowed me to get into their mind. So way back then, this was like over 18 years ago when I've been a legal academic for about 20 years, 21 years now. So when I started, I was young. I was the youngest lecturer in the department. But I took the bull by the horns. You didn't have anything like integrative law. You didn't talk about mental health. Back in the day, the main law program was LA Law.
Oh, I know LA Law.
And all the law students wanted to be, they assumed that that's what life was about, and that was the wrong image to impose upon law students. And so my agent of change days started there, and I started designing for learning, started challenging the status quo. I was very unpopular amongst traditional critics.
When they initially called you to be a lecturer in law, was it for a specific course, or we want you to do this course, but you can also do some additional seminars or other lectures? Like, how was it that you got to become an agent of change in the courses that you were teaching?
I started lecturing in wills and estates, commercial law, law of contract. And so when I got into the classroom and when I would teach about wills and estates, I realized it's very linear when you look at statutes. And then when you look at the common law and case law, they have to align with what statutory regulations are all about. And so I started raising the question on empathy in my lectures with my students. You know, so it would be, for example, X has lost her dad in this particular case. If you were a lawyer, how would you approach it? How would you approach it if she came to you and said, hey, I need help to wind up my dad's estate? There's no executor, there's no will. What do I go about doing? What would be your motivator? Would it be helping this person, or would the motivator only be making money from it? What would be the motivator? So I got them to reflect a whole lot from the get-go. And I think it was a difficult concept for them to compute initially, because law students are generally trained in adversarial modes of practice. The objective test, which nothing is wrong with, but they didn't, and you would know this, I would know this, that's how we were trained in law school, that it's the adversarial mode. You don't talk about feelings, you don't talk about emotions. Let's take that and pack it and place it in a corner. So in wills and estates, I started doing that a lot. And I'm very glad to say there are a number of my students who are in practice right now and who are parents. They are practicing with empathy.
Oh, that's wonderful.
They still reach out to me and say, hey, Neetu, do you remember me? It's like, yes, this is what I'm doing. And I'm just so proud of them. I'm proud of them.
You're so proud of them, but I'm so proud of you. You said you wanted to be make an impact, right? Be an agent of impact. And right there is evidence that you already, it's just in one way in which you are and have made an impact, you know?
I've never thought about it like that, but thanks for stating that.
At one point you said that some of your fellow professors or teachers at the law school were a little bit resistant to your approach. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, they didn't like the concept of emotions. But we are all human beings. It's a part of our makeup. It's who we are. It's what helps us to connect and relate to and communicate with and uplift people. And without those emotions, we're just empty voids. And I remember having a conversation with a professor colleague, and being a younger lecturer, it's like, Neetu, you've got to stick to the script, Neetu. This is not what law is about. All hippie business, no. I came up with a lot of resistance, but I've always tended to swim against the grain and the
Did
tide.
someone say hippie business? This hippie business isn't part of law.
Hippie business, yeah, those were the words. There's no place for this hippie business. I remember looking at this person and thinking to myself, you are so misguided in your perceptions and the way that you view the world by stating that you have no time for this hippie business. What you're really saying is that there's no place for emotions. So you're associating emotions with the characteristics of the 60s and 70s hippie revival, which is very, very concerning. It was very concerning to me. But it's something I took in my stride. I was never a person to conform. I'm never going to be a person to conform. I would conform when it is appropriate, but where there's room for change, you've got to push for that change if you know it's going to grow a generation or it's going to create an impact. And not many people are amenable to that.
Because when you said, I can conform or I do conform when it's appropriate, but where there's a space for change, then I go for the change or to advance that change. How do you know one from the other?
Okay, so when I look at conformity, with every business, with any organization, they're driven by policies, and that those policies are there for structure. And generally, with the organizations that I've been with, the policies have been very, very fair. And the policies are there to ensure proper operational flow for the existence and the day-to-day running of the business, which I agree with. When it comes to labor-related policies, they are very fair because they are in alignment with labor legislation in South Africa. So when it comes to procedural conformity, I think that is a must. But when we're coming to dealing with people, with emotions, with feelings, we cannot just look at things in a box where we are given a script and we are told these are the requirements, ABC, make sure it's compliant. No, the world doesn't look like that. There's a greater context that you need to look at. And so when you're looking at people, be it in the workplace, be it in law, be it in society, we need to look at those extraneous circumstances that surrounded why they behaved in a certain way or responded in a certain way. There's always a deeper reason or a backstory as to why they may have conducted themselves in a certain way. So I've always been a kind of person who doesn't look at things um, in a box. I don't look at it in a box. I respect the policies and I will apply the policies. But as a part of me applying it, I would look at the person as a holistic being. What drove you to this? What can we do to help you? What can we do different? Can you reflect upon what you've done as an individual? Right? And what you could do different. It starts with those humane, empathetic conversations. So that's where I didn't conform. Sometimes I just pushed that status quo and I went against the grain and I reached a lot of criticism. A typical example would be as a legal academic. I remember in 2015, I presented a paper at the Law Teachers Conference of Southern Africa on the integration of, on the leveraging of technology in legal education. Um, and the skeptics were there, the professors were there. There were people from universities across Southern Africa there and from some of the most esteemed universities there. And I remember standing there and I said, I'm going to do this presentation. I'm really passionate about this. It's really important. This is a space we need to be mindful of.
Define that to us. Like, what do you mean by leveraging technology in the legal profession? What was the core, the essence of your paper, the position of the paper?
So it's how could we leverage technology to augment legal education? Right? How could we augment it to use technology to create reflective legal practitioners in the future? So a typical example would be using a learning management system and how you would use a learning management system to engage students out of the classroom. Because you study law not only within four walls, studying law applies to everything that goes around, goes on around you. It doesn't take place in four walls. It takes place beyond the classroom. What's happening in politics? What's happening in industry? How can we engage with that before we get into the classroom? Technology helps with that. And gosh, I remember the very senior professors, the tenured professors. I call them relics of the past. But I came up against so much of resistance where they just couldn't compute how it could be used. And I remember hearing the words technology would never replace a lecture in the classroom and they were 100% correct. But the thing is, in as much as you cannot replace the lecture in the classroom with technology, if you don't evolve with the times and transform with the times, leverage this evolution of the fourth industrial revolution, AI, learning management system, blended learning, hybrid learning, which enable accessibility to education to a larger group of people, unless you embrace that, you're going to miss the bus and you're going to be stuck in the past and you're going to become irrelevant.
We are taking a brief break from this conversation to ask for your financial support. With each episode, we hope you can see how lawyers and peacemakers like you are contributing to the healing of the world. It takes many kinds of resources for the integrative law movement to keep going and affecting change. Your monetary donation can help us continue this important work by supporting the activities and the members of this community. Each contribution goes to promote the stability and accessibility of the movement and to support basic expenses like our Mighty Network group, web hosting, social media and event management, and this Integrative Lawyers of the World podcast. Because we like to give people choices, we have ongoing monthly options to match your budget, or you can make a one-time donation. Thanks to our non-profit corporate sponsor, the Renaissance Law Society, US supporters are able to make tax-deductible donations. Supporters from other countries, please check your local tax laws. To help establish confidence in your choice to support us, we have set up an open, collective, transparent plan to track how the community money is spent. For ways to support the Integrative Law Movement and our world-changing work, go to our website at www.integrativelaw.com and click on Support the Movement tab at the top of the page. Another great way to support us is to rate us 5 stars and comment, like, follow or subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, Google, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. These ratings and interactions help us get seen and heard by even more people to make an even stronger impact. Thank you for your support and spending time with us today. Enjoy the rest of this conversation.
So with technology and AI, there's a part of me that feels like I might become a relic and be left behind, because there are so many things when I look at AI, it frightens me as to, is there a point that we're like replacing our humanity in the AI? I'm like, I don't want to be left behind, but when it seems like we're so then I'm looking forward, I'm looking back, I'm looking forward, I'm looking back, and I don't know where I am aligned, so I just kind of stay where I am. But if you do that, you will eventually be with the people who are left behind.
I love that you stated that, because that is, I want to call it an apprehension. That's an apprehension that many people have, including myself, because I share your thoughts, I share your fears and your concerns 100%. So, in as much as we leverage technology, we need to become educated on it so that we know how to control it. I firmly believe that AI has to be regulated. I've been doing a lot of research on, for example, I'm not going to mention it because I don't want to advertise for them, but a popular AI tool, and you'd probably know what I'm talking about, a popular AI tool which a lot of students and industries seem to be accessing, the most common one. And while I've been researching that, it's opened up the window to a plethora of other AI tools and platforms that are out there, and it has completely blown my mind, because it's had me sitting back and asking the question, how is this going to replace human beings in the workforce, such as a graphic designer? Did you know you could also use AI to draft the particulars of claim, or a legal document, or to write an essay? You can, to write an essay. And I thought to myself, this needs to be regulated. So I'm actually about to pursue my doctorate in the regulation of AI.
Really fascinating.
Regulation of AI, we need to use it responsibly. And here's the thing, if there are students listening to this podcast that says, hey, I can use this to draft my essay, let me remind them that those AI platforms that they're using are not always 100% correct, number one. And the references that they give you may sometimes not exist, number two. All right. I actually did an exercise where I said, okay, these are the articles I want to write. And it was unrelated to law. It had to do with my personal life. Let me see how each of them write it, and let's see what it does to me within a space of 2 weeks. I would like to think I'm quite a critical and a lateral thinker on my own. And so I sat for 2 weeks every day for about an hour or two, and I would type these prompts in, and it would create the document, and I would paste it into my Word document, and then I would amend it. And after 2 weeks, I literally felt like my brain was dead, that I had the inability to think for myself. And I took all of it, I squashed it, I threw it away, and that was also, it added to my fuel, to my fire to write about the regulation of AI. It needs to be used responsibly. It's a wonderful tool for the evolution of humanity, to transform humanity, but it has to be managed. It has to be regulated because of the ethical considerations, because of the confidentiality considerations, because of the impact of human beings as a part of physically contributing to their respective economies. It can be concerning. So there's a very fine line. And I think until China is quite ahead with the regulations right now, but that would be expected. Yeah, that would be expected.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, Russia and the United States, nothing's set in stone. So I'm exploring these things, and I'm looking at what can be done, what are the risks, and let's see where that goes.
When you progress with this, keep us updated. Me personally, I would love to like read your research or your papers on this, and then if you publish anything on that, we can, once it's done, we can definitely share that with the integrative law community as well. How you said we can have, there's learning technology to help students incorporate stuff that's going on around them in the world in their legal studies. Can you give me an example of that? Because I'm not sure, like, what would be something?
Sure. So let's look at the integrative law module that I've designed as an example. Right, with the institution so it belongs to the IIE LLB degree. And so integrative law is an exit level module, meaning that 40 students can choose to do it before they graduate.
So you designed, I believe, the first course, the curriculum for integrative law.
Yes.
For an integrative law course. And this is one of the first curriculum law courses on integrative law, I think, anywhere. I want you to use this as an example, but maybe before you give it as an example, how did it come about that you designed this course? And then you can show it as the example of what you're, and we can bring it all together with your example.
So at that time, I was with a private higher education institution in South Africa, and their academic regulatory body is the Independent Institute of Education. It's an absolutely phenomenal organization that offers their own qualifications. And so they had put together a team to design an LLB degree, the first of its kind in the private higher education space in South Africa. So they were really the leaders in it. And so I was pulled together as a task team of 4 people to design this qualification for the organization. But obviously, it's an activity that didn't just include the 4 of us. There's a whole team of people at the IIU who also came in to bring alignment. And we had to ask ourselves the question, what could we do to set this degree apart and ensure that it's compliant with the Council of Higher Education requirements? The Council of Higher Education provides accreditation for programs in South Africa and make sure that it complies with regulations and the teaching and learning requirements, etc. So we had to make sure that it complied with those requirements. And at the time, one of the conversations were around the decolonization of legal education in South Africa. So we had to ask ourselves the question, how do we design this to ensure that we are complying with this new requirement of the CHE and the South African Law Deans Association? Now, when I looked at it holistically, in 2015, Kim had already reached out to me on LinkedIn, and it was the biggest blessing ever because I realized that there were other humane lawyers out there who shared my views and my emotions towards legal practice. So we had been having conversations, and I realized that integrative law was the key to the decolonization of legal education in South Africa. Because if you read you know, if you ever chat to Kim, she would tell you herself, integrative law is African dispute resolution. That's what it is, because it talks about restorative justice as opposed to retributive justice, collaborative law, all those good things, empathy, humanity, conversations.
When you say decolonization of the law, you're talking about moving away from the statutory common law adversarial system from that was brought over into South Africa during colonization.
It's the marrying together. A typical example would be, Kerry, if you existed in a space, would you not want to see yourself in it as well in order to enable you to identify with it? Now, that's what the decolonization of legal education is all about. It's not saying let's take the baby and throw it out with the bathwater. We need our civil systems in place. We need our current common law in place. Customary law also falls under common law in South Africa. What they were saying is, let's also spotlight African indigenous law in this continent that we're living in, and place a spotlight on it. A typical example would be, you get jurisprudence where you'd learn about Plato and Socrates and all of the deep thinkers, right? But then at the same time, you also have African jurisprudence and the philosophers from there. So we're saying in a subject or a module like jurisprudence, let's include those thought leaders in there as well. Let's not isolate them. We're saying, for example, if I'm teaching you wills and estates, let's bring in mindfulness into wills and estates, right? How does mindfulness operate? How do we educate the person who lives in an informal settlement on wills and estates? You explain it to them in a language that they would understand. So it's not saying erase what we currently have. We're just saying include it, integrate it, so that these strategies and the benefit of these strategies can also be used in our current spaces. Here's the thing, and I know that Kim, I think she mentioned it in Louisa's Peacemakers and Cutting Edge Law, if I'm not mistaken, but I do stand corrected on that. She spoke about the fact that dispute resolution really comes from indigenous societies. Whether you're in America or you're from Australia, or you're an indigenous person in South Africa, the way they resolve conflicts within their villages is with an induna and the elders, and they get together and they have conversations, respectful conversations, to try and resolve these disputes where all parties feel healed and supported when they've walked away. And so these are strategies that have existed for generations before we called it dispute resolution in South Africa or anywhere in the world. So it's basically saying, when we're talking about decolonization, we're saying let's elevate what has been happening nonetheless, and let's bring it into our civil systems and our current law, and recognize it and shed that spotlight. And that's what I did with the integrative law module when I designed it. I firmly believe that, one of the frustrations I had, is trying to get legal academia as a whole to see the value of this. And when I could see that this was the key to unlocking that, I made the suggestion, and I was quite fortunate because at the time we had an amazing head of law, and I think she's still there, Fiona Kaplan. And she's like, yes, I believe integrative law needs to be in there as well. Once I explained what it was about to her and how it would meet the CHE requirements. And so we have it as an elective module, and from what I understand, quite a few students register for it. And we had, quite a few students register for it. And some of them have done their third-year dissertation on aspects of integrative law. A lot of them have gone on to some integrative law courses, how do I put this, empowerment courses that have been run in South Africa through Amanda Lamont in Cape Town. So it's growing, and by having it as a module, it's formally recognizing it. So to take that and speak to how you use technology in that example, right, to augment students' learning, I had to design it with the use of a learning management system in mind, because the institution uses a learning management system called VC Learn, which is beautiful. And then you design the module based on, you use certain activities that align with the course content. Everything is provided to students online. They have to access it online. I would design, for example, in Learning Unit 1, what is integrative law? And this is hypothetically speaking, because I can't give away trade secrets. So hypothetically speaking, like what is integrative law? And you know, Kim talks about the 4 pillars of integrative law and a shift in consciousness and the humanization of the legal profession and legal education, as the case may be. So I almost always design with a reflective activity. So students must go onto their learning management system. They engage with that activity and they reflect upon it. They do their research on it. You want them to become masters of their own knowledge, not just engage with rote learning, right? Look at something that's currently happening in South Africa, such as load shedding. We have load shedding. We have to shed electricity. And we look at the governance structures around 𝐸𝐴𝐻 that handles load shedding. Now, let's take that and reflect upon what's happening in your environment, do your research, and ask yourself the question, how can integrative law help the situation? And then students would read it, and then they would engage in an online discussion where they have to comment on each other's post, but they're formulating thoughts, lateral thoughts, they're thinking, they're journaling.
So when you have a learning management system, is it part online, and then are there in-person courses too, like in-person classes?
It's blended learning, that's what it is. It's blended learning. So really speaking, the lecturer, the institution for this, for the organization or the campuses that offer this IIE LLB degree, I think they've got a footprint of about 7 campuses throughout the country. It may be more or less, I'm not too sure, since I work with them. And so it's really up to the lecturer as to how they design their learning. But there is a requirement on them to engage students in that online space. So it's actually a contact. It's contact. You have your contact sessions, which could be between 30 to 35 to 40 contact sessions in the semester. But students have to engage in that online space to complete certain activities. But it would depend on the lecturer on how they design that activity on that campus, depending on the needs of the students, because it focuses on student-centric learning. So here's the thing, when I design for reflective learning, number one, leveraging of the learning management system using technology, enabling students to learn what's happening around them and globally and reflect upon it, but more particularly to reflect upon how integrative law is the key to solving all of those problems.
Pausing, because I don't want to go into the Israel-Gaza problem, but is there a problem in the world that you can see right now, maybe even climate crisis or something that we can just talk about how an integrative law approach could help that? And we can brainstorm together if you want to talk about something like that, just to kind of bring what we're saying forward. It's
interesting that you raised that question on Israeli-Gaza war, because I was actually thinking about that before I signed on. And one of the things, this is something really laid on my heart, where I was actually thinking to myself, if people use integrative solutions, integrative law solutions, they would be able to resolve conflict that much more easily. Right now, if you look at the world holistically, what are the world leaders doing? They basically, and I'm going to say this respectfully, when they go on, it's all I see is ego. I see a lot of ego. I see a lot of posturing, but I'm not hearing solutions. I want to be very clear. And in no way is it okay for any civilians, any children on either side of this war to be going through what they are going through. Any loss of human life, any act of terrorism is never a good thing. But we need to look at the long-term repercussions and consequences of this on people's lives. And I have to ask myself the question, if these leaders put aside their egos, put aside their posturing, and sat down for a moment in a healing circle, I'm going to call it that, in a healing circle, and spoke to each other as human beings, how much more easier would it be to find solutions? As the first step, communicating with each other, not posturing on media so that the other side can hear it. And I think Blinken is doing a good job. Blinken is doing a good job by visiting the different countries and having a discussion with them. But it's going to be an interesting space to observe.
It really is. I just see it as a whole, the word that just keeps coming to me is trauma. Like I just feel so much trauma. Like people are on every side, and it's generational trauma, you know, that is repeating itself and creating more trauma. Um, and people are acting or reacting um, without really healing their trauma. And if you do that, it's just going to perpetuate trauma for future generations.
It's a painful conversation to have because we're looking at it as from a humanitarian perspective as human beings. I actually sat with my 10-year-old son yesterday and I said to him, son, you need to understand what's happening in the world. And I put on the news, and I'm very careful of which news channels I put on because I want him to see what war is all about. We don't know if it's going to make its way south. You don't know if it's going to make its way to where you are. I mean, in the south, when COVID hit, people thought, oh, it would never come here, but then it did. And then you had to deal with it. But I think this is an opportunity for us to educate people around us on humanitarian values. And I think that's a very big issue. The trauma is substantial. It's very, very substantial. And right now, the question is not only about, you know, whether Israel is going to get Hamas. It's about what are we going to do to create healing for those Palestinian children, for those Israeli children, for the families on either side that have been pulled apart by the savagery. It's savagery, right? In the name of freedom. So what is freedom? People are only free if we see the humanity in each other. If we can see that the person sitting across the room from me, the human being, we may have differing opinions, but we bleed the same color. We share the same emotions. We built to have the same thought processes. The things that affect me will affect you. We have more similarities than we have differences. So the more we see that, I think that's how healing will come about. But as you said, this is generational trauma. And it's heartbreaking, and it's going to be interesting to observe the space. It's going to be interesting to observe the space.
And like with I don't know how it is in South Africa, but in the US, or at least I'm seeing it with some of, you know, the different posts on social media and some of my friends, like I feel like there is a push to try to get you to choose a side. You're either with the Jewish people or you're not. You're either with the Palestinian people or you're not. And you have to choose one or the other. And I just feel like that is a
It's cruel.
it's a cruel, yeah, it's cruel for either one. And it's a cruel, I don't want to be in that space to have to choose this life is more important than this life, or this life is more important than that life. They're all important. And so I have been silent about it on social media. I haven't been posting. I haven't been, a few of friends who does things, you know, that I know that they're feeling stuff. I may like what they say, if it's nothing, as long as it's factual or something, but just to support them. But I saw a post yesterday where someone in our integrative law community, maybe you know him, Henry Yamplowski. He is a mediator, wrote books on conflict resolution. Finally, he said, look, we don't need, like, it's okay for you to not post something. And sometimes not posting something is giving space, because in this climate where posts are being sent to polarized parties, maybe not posting is contributing to the non-polarization. I don't know. He said it a lot more articulately now, but I was feeling guilty for not posting, but I just like didn't feel like I don't want to be part of the polarization.
And you don't have to be. And you're absolutely correct, because there are victims on both sides. There are victims on both sides as a result of the decisions of a group of men. That's what it is, of a group of men. You've actually hit the nail on the head for me, because I haven't been posting either. We don't have to pick a side. If you're picking a side, you're taking a stand, and you are devaluing the experience of someone on the other side. Now, I can only speak from my perspective as someone in my faith, as a Christian. I will always stick by what the Bible says. And what my Bible says is pray for all men. Pray for all men. Not only pray for this man or that man, pray for all men. Pray for all. And when I say man, I'm not, we have men and women, but man is a combination of male and female, you know. So pray for all men. And so I'm not going to be putting up posts because it will generate all of the wrong emotions. You shouldn't feel guilty about not posting. You can say a little prayer or light a candle or whatever it is that works for you in your space for peace in the Middle East. Because I think by taking a side, we're just deepening the divide.
Yeah,
we're just deepening the divide, and we want healing. We want healing. Pray for all men.
How can we use integrative law to help heal trauma, but not just trauma on an individual basis, but societal trauma, collective trauma? Are there ways or tools within integrative law to address collective trauma?
I think if you look at one of the main tenets and foundations of integrative law, it's love. It's the language of love. And I think if communities, if people, if society start speaking the language of love, that language of love starts with identifying each other as human beings. I think as an integrative law community, if we get together and start speaking that language of love, of your enemy is not necessarily my enemy.
Yeah.
And the enemy, the person that you see as your enemy is actually your brother. It's like a brother or a sister in the grander scheme of life. So let's talk about that language of love and that language of healing and of breaking down the differences. That's how it starts with. That's the foundation of integrative law. And once we start dismantling those divisions and we start expanding upon that language of love and how we're more similar than different, it removes the scales from a person's eyes. I know, I've been there. I can speak about this because I've been in a position when someone had to speak a language of love to me to take the scales off my eyes so that I could see someone across the table. I could see myself in that person across the table. So as a community, it starts with our community and our messaging, our joint messaging as a community. And it should be, don't pick a side. Let's look at healing. How do we heal? As a collective message. So, that's actually what I'm focusing on. I've deliberately not posted on it or flown any flag on any of my social media platforms. I refuse to engage with it because I also know that social media images can be misleading and it generates the incorrect emotions. And integrative law is about generating healing emotions, not dividing emotions.
When you were talking about integrating some of the indigenous customs of conflict resolution so that when people walk away from conflict, they felt supported, they felt heard. And that's how they left. The conflict resolution process allowed everyone of the conflict to feel that way. And that just brings attention to the importance of giving voice to people and listening to them so that people feel heard. That is, in my opinion, a part of the language of love. It's not just what we say to people, but it's how we listen and how we hear people. And I think that's what integrative lawyers do as well.
100%.
Earlier in our conversation, you had also said, and I wrote it down because I loved it, law is an agent of change if you know how to use it. What would you say to someone, a lawyer out there or a law student out there that says, look, I'm going into law, or I want to be a lawyer, or I am a lawyer and I wanted to be an agent of change, but I feel like I'm not doing anything meaningful or I'm not being an agent of change? What advice do you have to them on how to use law to be an agent of change?
There's a nice story behind that as well. I would always tell my law students, look at society around you, whether it's in your local community or globally or nationally in South Africa. What really upsets you? What really, really upsets you about what's happening around you? Now ask yourself the question, having been equipped and taught how human rights works, how the systems work, how can you leverage it to bring about change in those spaces? So here's a typical example. I had a group of 40 students about 3-4 years ago, who were finishing their degrees. And one of the students came to me and they told me, Neetu, we're really interested in joining this anti-human trafficking movement, but we also want to talk about mental health. And so what I told them is, look, guys, I said, draft a proposal for me, put together a presentation, and I will bring you before a board of trustees of a non-profit organization on which I serve. And you need to tell them how you as the youth plan on implementing strategies to change the pariah of society, of gender-based violence or of rape or whatever it is that was driving them. So it's about giving them platforms. It's about focusing on what areas of change which they are passionate about. I always tell my students, don't complain about the country, do something about it. Use law, right? So if you're passionate about the environment, right, what does environmental law tell you? So if you know there's dumping taking place in an area where it shouldn't take place, put together an activism group, right? Petition the municipalities, right? Get it in the newspapers. That's what social justice activists do. Connect with other social activism groups. Do a peaceful protest. Create education mechanisms for the public. Get the public involved in cleaning up. So it starts with the little things. And the thing is, with law students, I always tell my students, law is power in their hands. And the examples I would always say to them when they come to law school was that if you look at Nelson Mandela, lawyer, if you look at Bram Fisher, who helped Nelson Mandela and all of the other activists during the apartheid era, lawyer. If you looked at Mahatma Gandhi, lawyer, right? So these were people who used their legal skills, their legal knowledge to create tangible shifts in their environment that led to people like me and them being liberated and us seeing each other as human beings as opposed to by skin color. So I always leverage those examples, and I'm so excited because the group of students that I spoke about, they started their own NPO called Shine the Light that deals with mental health. Yeah, it's phenomenal. Some of the work that they're doing is amazing. So you need someone to empower you to feel empowered to empower other people. And I think coming from a legal academic platform, again, always swimming against the status quo and the tide and the current, I'm always going to leverage that for my students to find themselves in these spaces.
You said something. You need someone to empower you so that you can empower others. And then in that, you can empower to make lasting change. And that's what you're doing. Your students who designed that program are now having that Shine Light. Is that what the name of their organization?
Shine the Light, yes.
Shine the Light program. They're making an impact and you empowered them to make an impact. So again, when you said you wanted to go early in your career, when you were in the criminal law space, and you're like, this is not for me, I want to be an agent of change in the law and make an impact. How many times throughout this conversation, yep, you did it here, you did it here, you did it here, and here's another example of making that impact.
I never mapped it out like that, but you're actually getting me to reflect upon the fact that that has been happening. So this has been a growing experience for me right now.
Oh, well, good. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I'd actually love to mention one more thing. So I took a bold step and I resigned from the previous institution that I was at because I needed to really get into getting on the ground roots level and helping to develop programs from for previous victims of rape who want to empower society. And I've actually been working with someone. We're going to be forming a non-profit company soon. A survivor of rape. She's absolutely phenomenal. I'm going to mention her name because she speaks openly about it. Her name is Bronwyn Turner. She's a survivor of rape, but she's also a businesswoman. And, she came to me and she told me, Neetu, this is what I want to do, but I don't know how to do it. I want to empower silent victims in the corporate field. I want to empower young girls between the ages of 13 and 18 who may be experiencing certain things in their private lives, but they don't know how to speak about it, or they don't know how to identify that they're being abused or sexually harassed or assaulted, as the case may be. So I asked her, I said, Bron, what do you have in mind? She said, I want this to be formalized. And so this is when the instructional design thing came in, because I said, let's start creating programs. And I sat with her and I said, right, tell me everything that's on your mind. Just talk to me. And as she spoke to me, I identified and I created training programs, the names of training programs. And as she was talking, it's like, right, these are the learning outcomes for each one. This is how we're going to do it. And I gave it to her and I asked her, Bronnie, is this what you're looking for? And she said, yes. And I said, great, now let's go to the next level. So I'm actually working with her to help her get these training programs out. I will work with her to get funding, to get it into the corporate space, because I think a lot of people in the corporate space, be it in law or any profession, you sit in silence and you have nobody to talk to about these issues. How do you go to HR and say, my husband's, beating me up, or I've been raped by this person, without them questioning whether or not you have the sound mental capacity to continue with your portfolio? It's such a double-edged sword. So it's about putting these support structures in place. And I'm actually quite excited to see where this is going to go. It's a new project of mine with her. And the empowerment continues, empowering for me, empowering for her.
Well, that sounds like a much needed program that will, when you talk about layers of impact, when you think about, okay, so say you just talk about the person in one corporate setting who has been raped or suffered violence. So this program can help that person. But now then it trickles down to everyone around that person. Yeah, I was just thinking, when we go back to when people have trauma and they don't heal it, that trauma gets passed on to those in their lives. Now, when you impact and help the person who has been traumatized, you break the cycle. And so this program is not just helping individuals, but all those people that would be in the cycle of that trauma.
When I give them those tools, and we want them to know they are heard. There's someone here who cares. Step out, let us help you. And that's how you break the cycle. And that's how you educate people who are not victims, what I want to call them survivors. These people are survivors, people who have not experienced this in the workplace, to understand what these survivors experience. So a typical example would be, if you come and tap me on my shoulder at work and you're a male, it wouldn't seem like anything indifferent, but having been a victim of rape, how is that going to affect me?
Yeah.
How is that going to affect me? So what do we need to be mindful of? It's about mindfulness. So I'm quite excited to see how this is going to roll out. We're building, watch the space.
Is there something that the integrative law community and movement can do to support you in this new venture? And what is that? Or how can we support you in this?
I think anyone who wants to come forward to contribute to it would be great, to bring in their expertise from a legal perspective, obviously from a mindfulness. I think a mindfulness perspective is really, really important for training programs like this. How do we bring it in to be aware of what someone else is going through, or to read the telltale signs of what someone may be going through, but is not speaking about? How can I treat them differently? How can I respond to them differently as opposed to react? How could I be kinder? Those kinds of things are very, very important. And I think from an integrative law perspective, it's also a question of how can we help organizations, with their policies, etc., to ensure that these kinds of issues are incorporated and included in it. Resolution and finding solutions around these things are included in it. It's such a broad spectrum. We're quite open. Whoever wants to come in, you're more than welcome to come in and contribute. If it's about empowering, if you're bringing it in to empower people, let's do this. Let's do it.
What's the best way for people to contact you?
All right, so they can contact me via my email address. I'll give you my personal one. I think you have it already. It's neetutchetty@gmail.com. That's NEETUCHETTY. Well, you know the rest, at gmail.com. So just touch base with me and then we can chat, we can Zoom, whatever it is. Let's collaborate.
We'll also put your email address in the show notes so people can just copy and paste it from there as well. What does integrative law or being an integrative lawyer mean to you?
It means everything. Yeah. For me, it means being equipped with the tools and the power, I'm gonna use the word power in very humble terms, with the power to create impact in the environment in which I exist. Whether it's a tiny impact that has a ripple effect or a big impact. So it's about changing a mindset. It's about changing the heart language. It's about changing the body language in people to see each other as human beings. And integrative law is something that I use to drive that very much. So I think if I didn't have it in my life as a valuable tool, I wouldn't be able to push the kind of change that I do in my environment. So that's just an elevator pitch of what it means to me. I could write a thesis on it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Or design a course.
Or design a course. There we go.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being part of Integrative Lawyers of the World. It truly has been wonderful talking to you today.
Thank you, Kerry. I loved it. Thanks for having me.